Hey all, it's Macabre Derek here, getting a little scruffy apparently. But we're here to end up talking to you about Primogen. That's right, VTM, creating your own city. And we are now on part 3, Primogen. Now, when people end up fleshing out their city, obviously after you've done the prints, this is probably one of your first go-tos. It's understandable. The Primogen are typically figureheads of their clan, but let's stop right there for a second. That kind of implies something, doesn't it? It kind of implies that all clans will be represented in the court. This is not always the case. In fact, to some princes' situation, it might actually be more advantageous to not end up having every single clan represented in your little court. More specifically, you have to think about what a Primogen is. A Primogen is an advisor. He's someone who takes the concerns of the masses and the situation that's happening at the ground level. It trickles up, and eventually, if it's important enough to reach a Primogen's ear, the Primogen might need to end up passing that along to the prince with a suggestion on how to go about it as to not waste the prince's time in endless deliberation, though a smart prince will always end up trying to keep it in the mind for a moment, not always just hand-waving everything away in favor of the Primogen. Otherwise, then he comes across as lazy as opposed to authoritative, as opposed to necessary. So, what can a Primogen do, and why do you need them in your city? Well, quite frankly, when a city starts to grow past a particular point, as I said beforehand, the prince can't do it all on his own. He's gonna need allies. He's gonna need people, kindred, that are closer to him than the rabble, than the neonates, than whatever you want to call them. You're going to need to end up taking a quick look at those around you and end up seeing who can I end up putting with a little bit of power, a little bit of responsibility, and make sure that they're in a position where they need to get this kind of action done. This is where you end up coming across the Primogen. The Primogen is not always the eldest of a clan. That's right. That's something that some people just make an automatic assumption of. And to be fair, it's an accurate one for the most part. I mean, why not? The one with the most life experience, unlife experience, I guess, probably would make for a very good Primogen. Except if they've been around that long, maybe the prince can't trust them to end up keeping their word. They've been in this game long enough to know how it works. Then again, they might have been in it long enough to end up knowing when they're in a situation where they can't take on the prince head on. And life might be a little too good compared to what else might come around the corner if they just so happen to usurp that prince. Things are pretty good for your clan when you don't have to be at the very top to get what you want. Now, the thing about Primogen is that you typically, in a basic Camarilla city, you have 7 clans. Gangrel, Tremere, Ventru, Toreador, Nosferatu, Malkavian, and Bruja. I seem to be picking on the Bruja lately. Who knows? Might be onto something there. Well, these 7 clans potentially could be in your city, the entire thing. So, what do you do with that? Well, you might initially think, well, I need to end up having 7 Primogen. Well, that's 7 people you're going to be owing favor to. You're going to need to give a little bit of your power back. And how do you know that all 7 are going to be aligned with you? In fact, having them so close to you and giving advice, trying to help you run a city, might be influencing your decisions. And eventually they might end up having this situation where they're trying to end up usurping you. Now, what if you're the Primogen themselves? Or better yet, how do you make Primogen? First off, You have the respect of a clan. Ironically, this doesn't necessarily need to be your own clan. Ventru are notorious for taking in those without a sire. Some Kadef, even if the situation calls for it, though it depends on what point in the timeline and what kind of story you're writing. Those who are clanless. But overall, Ventru will go out of its way to take in a neonate, because quite frankly, if they don't do it, who will? I view it as a point of responsibility and a way to end up currying favor, a way to make sure that they keep their face. They also tend to do this for whole clans, except Bruja. There's kind of a thing going on there that's not particularly liked. However, if there's one particular clan who does not receive representation, who has not earned Primogen status, it might actually behoove you to try and speak on their behalf. Consult with them. Yes, they might be kicked down. They might even be lower clan. However, that support of the weight of numbers can be very powerful in court indeed. The Gangrel might not end up having a Primogen, but the Toreador, who is bemused by their so barbaric and yet so raw moments, might actually end up serving to play as a Gangrel Primogen. Well, more accurately, representative of the Gangrel, despite being Toreador. They'd probably also be the Toreador Primogen. They take on the notion of representing these clans. The clans that they represent bring issues to them. They end up trying to end up dealing with them as best they can before stuff has to go uphill, because eventually shit rolls downhill. And this gives you a very interesting way of currying favor, because if you can find particular points to grab the prince's ear and maybe make things a little bit better for your clan and maybe a little bit better for your allies, well, all of a sudden, all that stress that's been pulled off of them, all that situation that you've managed to shift into the favor, has to come back up, because they all now owe you, and they owe you respect. They might even owe you boons, depending on the degree of how well you can wheel and deal. And if you are Primogen, you can deal with the best of them. Your situation says that you might even be able to hold things together. Now let's take a look at that small city. Indeed, that small city might have maybe 12, maybe 15 vampires in it. That's it. That's a small court. However, that small court might end up requiring some tidbits. So a simple example is, if we end up taking the two adversaries who have been trying to vie for the prince's attention. Well, the one who says, I'm sticking to my own clan, well, maybe, just maybe, the other one tries to end up saying, well, you can stick to your own clan and be a purist, but I recognize those in our city. Tries to end up building face. He tries to build up so that other kindred, while maybe not buying this for a second, that they're actually, important to them, they do realize that because they're useful, just that weight of number might then go to his side. And now all of a sudden you have a large culmination of kindred under one Primogen. So the other side can't afford to do this, so he's going to end up doing the same. Maybe eventually, if the numbers grow or if the city seems too divided, in fact, it might actually behoove one of these individuals to try and elevate another to the rank of Primogen. Introduce them to the prince, describe their loyalty, have their loyalty tested, show the prince that this individual is not only a firm supporter of the Camarilla and his city, but that you can end up trusting in their advice, because they have become a leader amongst their clan. Okay, so now all of a sudden a second or a third Primogen gets elevated. So the one who raised that one up is the one who has the backing of court to get better sway with the prince. And this is how those basic politics start to meander. Now keep in mind, as I've said before, and it's been put to me so well, I have to use this quote. Kindred move at a glacier's pace. Because they move that quickly, everything's calculated. And so they spend decades developing these scenarios. So a new Primogen coming in might be a huge shakeup. Try and imagine the typical Venture Prince. Now all of a sudden having to deal with a Toreador and a Tremere Primogen. The Tremere tries to end up keeping a certain degree of stability, wants to end up proving that they are necessary for his court in order to curry favor, larger domain, more hunting grounds, maybe more assistance, more power, being able to gain a boon or offer a boon to the prince. A lot of flex there, considering it's the most powerful kindred in the city, one of the most well-connected, the one able to hold their position. Well, all of a sudden the Toreador says, yes, well, that's all well and good to look at what you've done, but however, look at our supporters. This Toreador Primogen ends up pointing to the Gangrel, maybe points out to the Nosferatu. Oh, the Nosferatu, a very powerful ally, isn't it? They end up spitting upon the Bruja. I make an example, trying to end up appeasing this Ventru. Well, now all of a sudden, who's gaining the favor? Well, the Toreador's going to have to end up keeping this position as well as they can, but now needs to watch for what the Tremere does. A Primogen is appointed, rarely chosen by clan, usually by prince. However, the prince may offer, if he knows which way the vote's going, for the clan to select a Primogen, one that they trust to reveal. Doesn't do this too often, because what happens if you end up picking somebody who will directly oppose you in absolutely every way and try and undermine your authority? No, you can't have that. You need to end up making sure that that one's going to support you and yet still has the support of his clan. This is how peace treaties are drawn out between the Ventru and Bruja, who will go at each other's throats on whim if given the opportunity. Your job as a Primogen is to balance the will of the prince versus the interests of the clans you represent versus your own clans. And that's a lot of contacts to be wielding. The stronger your clan is, the stronger your position is with the prince. Fairly simple. But this also means now you got to be very selective of those individuals who you represent. You need to crack the whip. And the whip is another position altogether that may be necessary, maybe not. Depends on the number of kindred and incidents that are happening. Remember, a prince does not grant the ability to sire on a whim. It's a very calculated point. Because to give someone a child is to also give them another asset, another set of skills at their disposal, one who is beside them. And in doing so, gave them power, while increasing the risk to everyone else. Because every time a kindred is embraced, you roll the dice that something can go wrong. Some kind of masquerade breach will happen, or perhaps even worse, the usurping of all your hard work to build a kingdom. Primogen can sway this vote. Primogen have the ability to flex just enough on a prince and rival Primogen, and especially those underneath them. to end up making sure that the plots go where they need to go. Because after all, the prince doesn't want to end up upsetting the Primogen too much. What would happen if he did? He wouldn't be prince for long. That being said, the cunning prince might make sure that the Primogen have something else to think, rather than trying to strong arm the strongest kindred in the city.